Good evening, this is Andy Stevens, and this is Module 14, our case study for EDL 852, which is our Introduction to Building Leadership class. Let's start by examining some of the key facts of the case. The case takes place in a small rural community where over 60% of the residents are active farmers. The school district currently has two schools, one elementary school and one 7 through 12 junior and senior high combined. The population in the county and the school district is growing due to three primary factors. One, the land values in the county are still relatively low. The schools are newer compared to surrounding districts. And the proximity of the community and the school district to a populated urban area is such that it attracts people to the area by offering them the proximity to those amenities without some of the headaches that are presented by living in an urban area. Additionally, because this is an agricultural-based community, there has been a large influx of immigrant families. Most of those families have children, which has kind of shifted the paradigm and the needs in the district, which led to two people running for school board positions, being elected to those positions, and then championing the opening of two new schools, mostly because the current schools are overpopulated. Additionally, the superintendent takes the recommendation from the board and recommends that a study be done by an educational planner and an architect. Those two entities come together and present to the board three various options that the board considers. Those options, ultimately, the third option was recommended by the architect and the planner, which was to build a brand new middle school on the existing site of the junior senior high. This process led to the community being divided into three main factions, very much like you would see in any sort of political arena. There were obviously people that supported option 1, people that supported option 2, people that supported option 3, which was ultimately what was approved by the Board of Education. The action of the board approving the third option, the building of a brand new school on the existing site, leads to the superintendent hiring Susan Potter to be the principal of the new school. Susan Potter is considered a middle school educational expert, and after much consideration and reflection, she gladly accepts the new job. Once Principal Potter is in place, she forms an advisory committee. This advisory committee is essentially looked at as a planning committee for the new school. They meet regularly to work on all of the various planning components of the opening of a new school. As the committee begins, there's conflict amongst the committee based on the creation of the vision, mission, and philosophy statements. And this really is the crux of the case study. How does Principal Potter handle this conflict? Ultimately, Principal Potter has been tasked with creating these guiding documents by the committee, of which she does not agree. As you look at this case study and think about the legal and ethical ramifications of this case, as I was analyzing and synthesizing the information, I did not see any legal issues. I didn't notice any laws being broken or potential laws. However, there are some ethical challenges, I think, that are presented in this case. First and foremost, the way that Helen, the committee chair, is behaving. I think many people would consider her behavior to be bullying in nature. Additionally, the fact that Helen is related, has a family relationship with one of the Board of Education members. I think that creates a real conflict of interest when one of the board members is directly related via family to the committee of the planning committee for the new school. And then lastly, ethically, how should a vision statement be created? Is that something that should be created by the leader, metaphorically the CEO of the school, if you will, or is that something that should be created collaboratively by all stakeholders within an organization? If you boil it down, basically, in my opinion, the problem here is how does Principal Potter lead the school while also respecting the wishes of the committee, her boss, and all the other various stakeholders? Thinking about other people, places, and programs that are involved, obviously, we've talked about most of the key players. We've talked about Principal Potter, her boss, Superintendent Rawlings, the Board of Education. We've talked about the parents and the stakeholders that are represented by the advisory committee. The places involved, obviously, are the school district and the community in which the school is going to reside and the various demographics of that community. The fact that the new school will be built on the same site as the existing facilities. And then also, what is the relationship between this smaller agricultural-based community and the larger urban area that's a mere 10 miles away? And then also, as far as programs are concerned, anytime you're opening a new school, you have to think about curriculums that will be offered, core classes versus electives, athletics and extracurricular opportunities for students, and then all of the various support service programs for your student population, whether that be ILS or other special ed programs, rather that is socio-emotional support for your students, things of that nature. So really, as we look at this case, those are the primary people, places, and programs involved. So after reviewing and prioritizing all of the information, I think it's most important that we identify who are the stakeholders that are going to be most impacted by this conflict present between Principal Potter and the advisory committee. Who is at stake in the outcome? Who stands to gain the most? Who stands to lose the most? Which stakeholders are going to be consulted? And then lastly, what do I know already as a leader, as a building administrator? And what do I need to know? And how do I reconcile that knowledge gap that might exist? So in my opinion, when we look at this case, there are three primary options that Principal Potter has to choose from. First, she can do nothing. She can create the vision and philosophy statements as requested by the committee. She could go to the other end of the spectrum as her second option and dig in and refuse to create any of the new documents until the committee agrees to work in a collaborative nature. Or, in my opinion, her third option is she could basically go and collaborate with her boss, Superintendent Rawlings, and the school board, and have them help her create the new vision and mission and philosophy statements. If you examine the pros and cons of those options, I think essentially what you would find is this. First, if she decides to choose option one, which is to do nothing and create the philosophy statement as requested, obviously the big pros of that decision are she'll please the committee. You know, they'll feel like that they were honored and their wishes were recognized, and it would give her full autonomy as the building leader to create the vision and mission and philosophy statements to create the culture that she really wants for her school. The downsides or the cons, obviously, contradicts her personal beliefs as a leader and an administrator, and what kind of ramifications in the future will that have with the advisory committee? If you go against them from the beginning, is that going to just further the angst and the conflict that is present? If she goes to the other end of the spectrum and digs in and says, I refuse to create any of the documents you're requesting, obviously the pros of that is she's standing up for herself and what she believes. If ultimately she held out until she could create those documents collaboratively, then those documents would represent the will of the group and not just Principal Potter. Obviously, the downsides, the biggest one is that that's a direct contradiction to the wish of the committee, as well as now that leads to conflict, which creates a whole other level of complexity to opening this brand new facility. The third option, where she could network and work collaboratively with her boss and the Board of Education, A big advantage to that, in my opinion, is that would help build a strong working relationship with district leadership and her bosses. She's new to the district, so creating those strong bonds between you and your supervisor, I think, are very beneficial. And because her original intent as the principal was to build these documents collaboratively, that satisfies those desires for her. Obviously, the cons are that will upset the committee. They may feel like she went above their head, quote unquote. And while the philosophy and vision were created collaboratively, it's not necessarily the philosophy or the vision of the committee, or the will of the group. So based on those options, I would choose option one. I think option one is the best possible decision for all of the stakeholders. I would make sure that I would implement that option in a very specific and deliberate way. And I would also express my concern at the next committee meeting, which we'll talk more about here in a moment. And then lastly, I think it's imperative that if you are going to go ahead and honor the wish of the committee, which is option one, that you continue to work with all of the stakeholders, not only those that are on the committee, but also those that are not, to make sure you're refining and polishing and really working hard to create the best possible culture for the brand new school. So lastly, how would I actually implement the decision to create? And I would bring that draft to the next meeting and of the committee. I would make sure to solicit feedback from the committee to make sure that they are providing their thoughts as they assured me they would do, based on the case study. As the case study states very explicitly that the committee is willing to provide feedback once Principal Potter brings those documents back to the committee. I would also tell the committee that while I created these drafts based upon their wishes, I would be seeking feedback from other stakeholders to make sure that I got as many opinions and as many ideas as I possibly could. And then again, in the spirit of collaboration, I would stress to the committee how important I feel us working together is, and not more of a autocratic leadership style. So with that wraps up my analysis of the case study for Module 14. I want to thank everybody for a great class. Have a good rest of your evening.